Hello, and thank you for joining in on our seventh and final video of our grief series. My name is Helen Timbreza, and I'm so glad you joined us today. To wrap up our series, I'm going to have a conversation with you guys about boundaries. Boundaries is something that I am very passionate about. I used to work in community mental health, and I really struggled with a lack of healthy work boundaries. And because of this, it really impacted my work. I learned a lot about boundaries, and I'm excited to share this information with you guys. I can recognize that creating boundaries in the workplace is a hard thing to do, and sometimes it's scary, and sometimes we might not even know how to do it. So I want to start with, what are boundaries? Boundaries are a limit that we are setting. They are either a verbal or a physical or an emotional setting that we have where we say, this is as far as we will go and we will not go any farther. This is what I'm willing to talk about, and this is what I'm not willing to talk about. This is the way I'm willing to let you treat me, and this is the way I'm not willing to let you treat me. And these are important in all aspects of our lives. So someone with poor boundaries really struggles with a lack of self-esteem. Maybe they have some anxiety issues. They're experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue. They're just not doing well in their work and in their personal lives. And grief adds a whole other layer to our boundaries. If we don't have boundaries, especially when it comes to our grief, we're going to feel so much worse, and it's going to be harder to deal with our grief. So, what does it look like for a person with healthy boundaries? What it will look like is you will feel more confident and you'll have a higher self-esteem. Maybe some anxiety feelings, maybe they'll subside a little bit. And you'll also maybe feel like your grief is a little bit more bearable. It's a little bit easier for us to live with the grief that we're dealing with. So, how do we establish boundaries? So the first thing we need to do is we need to go on a journey within ourselves to see what we are okay with and what we are not, what we value, what is important to us, and things that maybe trigger us. And this isn't an overnight process. It's going to take time. You're going to have to really evaluate what is good for you. And in this process, you're also going to notice maybe some physiological symptoms within yourself. So if someone says something and it upsets you, or maybe triggers you, you can notice the physiological symptoms that come with that trigger. So maybe your stomach gets tight or it drops. Maybe you feel your chest get really hot. Maybe your fists clench. Recognize those and begin to recognize that a boundary needs to be set. Some other things you might notice is you really value anti-racism, and you want to make sure that there are no racial slurs or racial jokes said around you, especially in the workplace. Recognize that and begin to set a boundary. So let's have a conversation about how we set these boundaries, and how, after we've gone through this long journey of figuring out what we value and what we want to set boundaries around, how do we establish those? It starts with a meaningful conversation with the person you're wanting to set a boundary with, whether that is a colleague, maybe a partner, a relative. You have a meaningful conversation and you're open and you're honest. I encourage using I statements. So saying something like, I feel this way when this is said. I don't want to have this happen to me again. I would prefer if you wouldn't say this to me. And with that, you need to be assertive, and you need to kind of be tough when it comes to setting that boundary. You can do it in a compassionate and empathetic way, but hold strong onto what you feel. And then an initial response may be pushback from the person you're setting a boundary with. They may want to be like, well, no, you're just being too sensitive. You are not being too sensitive. You are allowed to have boundaries around whatever you want, and you are allowed to have feelings about your boundaries, and you're allowed to feel strongly about your boundaries. It's okay. So once you establish these boundaries and you have a meaningful conversation with the person you're setting a boundary with, stick to them. If you let it slide once or twice, you're going to consistently let it slide. Stick to your boundaries, whether that's a time constraint, saying, I will only spend an hour with this colleague, or I will only work my 40 hours a week and then I will be off. And once I'm off work, I am not reachable by my work. It's okay to have those boundaries and stick to them once you set them. So these are just some quick tips and tricks to boundaries. If you want a further conversation about it, I'm so happy to have that with you guys. Please reach out to me or anyone else on the Colorado Spirit team, and we would be happy to have a further conversation with you about this. Thank you so much for joining in on our series, and I hope it was helpful. You should be receiving a survey from us that will kind of just ask for some data and some feedback about how the series was for you. And if you have any questions, again, please reach out to us. Thank you so much.